You know that feeling? You spend years learning a language, you memorize all the grammar rules, but then when you're in a real conversation, you freeze up? Well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're going to talk about the huge shift in language teaching that's all about moving away from those dusty old rules and focusing on what really matters, communicating in real life.
So let's really break this down. On one side, you've got the old way, right? Endless drills, memorizing verb charts, and this heavy focus on being perfectly accurate all the time. But on the other side, you have the new way, which asks a much simpler question. Can you actually use the language to get your point across? It's a total game changer, really. It moves the goal from perfection to actual connection.
And that's the big question, isn't it? What happened to cause such a fundamental shift in how we think about teaching and learning languages? Well, it wasn't just one single thing. It was a whole new philosophy about what language even is.
And that brings us to what everyone in the field calls the communicative shift. This is the foundational idea, the bedrock that has completely reshaped the modern language classroom. It's all about seeing language not as some academic subject you study, but as a tool that you use.
At its core, this whole philosophy says that the main reason to learn a language is, well, to communicate. Now that might sound super obvious, but for a long time, it really wasn't the focus. The goal here is expressing yourself, understanding other people, and just handling real situations, not just acing a grammar test.
So let's break down what this actually means for you, the learner. These approaches are basically built on 4 key pillars. First, they're learner-centered, putting you at the heart of everything. They're interaction-based because, hey, language is a two-way street. They focus on fluency before accuracy, which frees you up to just talk. And maybe most importantly, they're all rooted in how people genuinely use the language out in the real world.
Okay, so the main operating system for this whole philosophy is something called communicative language teaching, or CLT. Just think of it like the foundational code that all of these modern methods are built on. Its number one goal is simple: get learners communicating with meaning and fluency.
A CLT classroom just feels alive. I mean, instead of students sitting silently memorizing lists, you'll see them planning a trip together, or debating a topic, or role-playing a job interview. Mistakes aren't seen as a bad thing. They're actually proof that you're trying. The whole room is just buzzing with real communication.
Now, check this out, because this slide shows how the teacher's role completely flips on its head. They go from being the sage on the stage, the expert lecturing at the front, to being the guide on the side. Their job isn't to talk at the students anymore. It's to design interesting activities and then step back and let the communication happen.
So that's the big picture philosophy. But how does it actually play out in a classroom? Let's look at a few specific methods that are all about the power of learning by doing.
One of the most popular ways to apply CLT is something called task-based learning. Here, the entire lesson is built around completing a real-world task. So you're not learning vocabulary just in case you need it later. You're learning it because you need it right now to plan that trip or solve that problem with your group.
And the structure is actually pretty simple and brilliant. First, in the pre-task stage, the teacher sets the scene. Then comes the main task, where students are just let loose. They use whatever language they have to get the job done. It's only afterward, in the post-task stage, that the focus shifts back to getting feedback and fine-tuning the language.
Now, something that fits right in with this is cooperative language learning. The whole idea here is that, we learn better when we learn together. It's all about creating a classroom where students are a team, working in pairs or small groups, helping each other out, and tackling problems collaboratively.
And the results of this are just so powerful. I mean, of course it builds your communication skills. That's a given. But it also develops really important social skills. And maybe the biggest thing is, when you feel supported by your classmates, your confidence to just take risks and use the language, it goes through the roof.
But what if you could learn a language without it even feeling like a language class? Well, that's the core idea behind our next set of approaches, which are all about learning through other subjects.
So this is content-based instruction, or CBI. Imagine you're learning about the solar system or ancient history, but the entire class, the textbook, the lectures, the discussions is in English. You get so wrapped up in the fascinating content that you start to pick up the language naturally, almost like a side effect.
Now, there's a European version of this called CLIL, which stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning, and there's a subtle but really key difference here. While CBI's main goal is really the subject matter, CLIL puts the content and the language on equal footing. There are explicit goals for both. Kalila is usually defined by what they call the 4 C's. So first, of course, you have the content, the subject itself. Then you have the communication needed to talk about it. This in turn develops cognition, or your thinking skills. And finally, it builds an awareness of culture. It's a really complete, holistic way to learn.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit. What if the basic building block of language isn't actually grammar at all? What if it's words? Or, to be more specific, groups of words?
This is the big idea behind the lexical approach. It basically argues that we don't speak by building sentences from scratch using grammar rules. Instead, we speak in chunks, these natural phrases and expressions. We just pull these pre-made chunks from our memory. Honestly, this is a big part of how native speakers sound so fluent.
I mean, think about a phrase like, on the other hand. You didn't learn that by analyzing the grammar, right? You just learned it as one single unit, one chunk that signals you're about to say something different. The lexical approach says we should be focusing on learning thousands of these chunks.
So with all these different philosophies and methods floating around, what does a modern teacher actually do in the classroom? Well, they don't just pick one, they build the toolkit.
A really key tool that you'll find in all these approaches is something called scaffolding. It's kind of like training wheels for language learning. The teacher gives you some temporary support, maybe a list of useful phrases or the beginning of a sentence, just enough to help you do something you couldn't quite do on your own. Then, as you get stronger, that support is slowly taken away.
And that really brings us to the most important point of all. There is no single best method. A great modern teacher uses what's called an eclectic approach. They're like a chef who skillfully pulls from task-based learning, the lexical approach, CLT. They know all the ingredients and can choose the exact right tool for the right students at the right moment.
So in the end, all of these different paths, they all lead to the same place, meaningful communication. They've turned language learning from this rigid memorization exercise into a dynamic, human, and interactive journey. So the final question is, whether you're a teacher or a learner, now that you know the goal is communication, how are you going to use it?